Did you know that the biggest threat to your beautiful garden might be completely invisible, lurking just inches beneath your feet? If you are constantly battling mysterious plant deaths, soggy lawns, or roots that just rot away, you are probably fighting a hidden war against high groundwater. But what if I told you that trying to aggressively dry out your dirt is actually the worst thing you can possibly do? In this video, we are going to expose the shocking truth about managing a high water table and reveal the ultimate secrets to fixing a waterlogged yard fast. You are going to learn how to turn this frustrating landscape nightmare into your greatest gardening advantage. I guarantee you will discover at least one surprisingly simple trick today that completely contradicts everything you thought you knew about yard drainage. Do you believe it is totally impossible to grow fruit trees in a swampy yard? Let me know your thoughts in the comments right now, and stick around, because I'm about to prove you wrong. Before we dive into the life-saving solutions, let us quickly set the stage and understand what we are actually dealing with. High groundwater is not just a random puddle after a heavy rainstorm. It is a persistent, underground reality caused by local geography, dense clay soil layers, or simply living near natural water sources like lakes and hidden underground springs. Historically, farmers and builders completely avoided these low-lying areas because the saturated soil literally starves delicate plant roots of necessary oxygen and destroys massive building foundations through intense winter frost heaving. When the water table sits just below the surface, your soil acts like a fully loaded sponge with absolutely zero capacity to absorb any new rainfall. Understanding this hidden dynamic is the absolute foundation of everything we will do next. We are not just trying to move water around. We are fundamentally changing how your entire landscape breathes and functions on a biological level. So, let us start by recognizing the hidden signs of high groundwater before it becomes a complete disaster. You might think your yard is fine because there are no giant puddles, but nature always leaves clues. Have you ever noticed patches of thick green moss growing where grass should be? Or maybe you have seen an explosion of moisture-loving weeds, like horsetail or sedge, completely taking over your lawn. These are the silent alarms your yard is ringing. The common myth here is that moss just means your soil is a little bit acidic, but in reality, it is often a screaming indicator that the water table is hovering just inches below the surface, choking out the healthy grass roots. Picture a sponge that is already completely soaked. If you pour even one more drop of water on it, the water just sits on top. That is exactly what your soil is doing. By paying attention to these specific plants, you can diagnose a high water table long before you ever dig a hole or wait for the spring rains to flood your basement. It is like having a free, natural moisture meter built right into your backyard. Do not ignore these warning signs, because catching them early is the first step to saving your entire landscape. Now, let us talk about the most common mistake people make. The absolute biggest myth in landscaping is that you can fix a high water table simply by dumping a few truckloads of fresh topsoil over your yard. It sounds incredibly logical, right? Just raise the ground level and the water stays below. But here is the harsh truth. Adding a thin layer of soil on top of a swamp just creates a slightly taller swamp. The water will inevitably wick its way up through the new dirt like a paper towel soaking up a spilled drink. Imagine trying to fix a leaky boat by just putting a thicker carpet over the hole. The water is still coming in, and now your expensive new carpet is ruined too. All that expensive topsoil you just bought will quickly become waterlogged, heavy, and completely useless for growing deep-rooted plants. Plus, if you do not slope that new soil correctly, you might accidentally direct all that excess water straight into the foundation of your house, creating a much more expensive nightmare. So, before you call the gravel company to order 10 tons of fresh dirt, you need to understand that the water must be directed away, not just temporarily buried under a cosmetic layer of expensive topsoil. To really beat this problem, we need to dive into what the water table actually is. Think of the ground beneath your feet as a giant, multi-layered cake. The top layer is the soil you dig in, but deep down there is a layer of solid rock or dense clay that water simply cannot pass through. When it rains, the water soaks down until it hits that solid barrier, and then it starts to pool upwards, filling all the tiny gaps in the soil above it. The very top level of this underground pool is called the water table. The tricky part is that this level is not static. It moves up and down depending on the season, the amount of rainfall, and the melting snow. In the heat of summer, it might be 10 feet deep, but in early spring, it can rise all the way up to touch the soles of your shoes. A fantastic way to visualize this is to imagine digging a hole at the beach. You dig down a few inches into dry sand, and suddenly the hole fills with ocean water. That is exactly what is happening in your garden. Knowing exactly where your seasonal high water table sits is absolutely crucial because it dictates every single decision you will make about what to plant and where to build. So why exactly is this underground water such a deadly threat to your beloved garden? It all comes down to one simple word, and that word is oxygen. Plant roots do not just drink water, they actually need to breathe air to survive. Healthy soil is full of tiny air pockets that act like tiny lungs for your plants. But when the groundwater rises and completely saturates the soil, it pushes every single bubble of oxygen out. The myth here is that plants are dying because they are getting too much water. The truth is, they are actually suffocating and drowning from a total lack of air. Picture yourself trying to breathe while completely submerged underwater. That is exactly what your tomato plants and apple trees are experiencing. Without oxygen, the roots quickly begin to rot, turning black and mushy. Once the roots die, they cannot absorb nutrients, and the top of the plant will slowly turn yellow, wilt, and perish, even though it is sitting in a puddle of water. It is a terrible irony. So, our primary goal is not just to dry out the dirt, but to bring life-saving oxygen back into the root zone where your plants desperately need it to thrive. If you think high groundwater is only a problem during the rainy season, you need to hear about the winter nightmare. When waterlogged soil freezes, it expands with incredible destructive force. This process is known as frost heaving, and it is an absolute disaster for both your plants and your hardscaping. If your water table is sitting just a few inches below the surface when the first hard freeze hits, the frozen water will literally push the soil upwards. The myth is that cold weather kills your perennial plants. In reality, it is the frost heaving that physically rips the roots right out of the ground, exposing them to the deadly freezing air. Imagine an invisible hand grabbing your prized rosebush and slowly yanking it up by the roots. That is the sheer power of expanding ice. This same force will also crack your concrete walkways, destroy your garden walls, and tilt your fence posts until they look like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Managing your groundwater is not just about saving your summer vegetables. It is absolutely essential for protecting your permanent landscape investments from being completely torn apart by the relentless expansion of frozen, saturated winter soil. Now, let us move on to the heavy artillery, starting with the legendary French drain. If you have serious groundwater issues, this is often the most reliable, permanent solution you can possibly implement. A French drain is brilliantly simple in its concept. It is essentially an underground trench filled with gravel and a perforated pipe that safely guides hidden water away from your problem areas. You can think of it as a secret underground highway specifically designed for excess water. When the groundwater rises, instead of soaking your lawn, it naturally seeks the path of least resistance. It flows into the airy gravel, seeps into the holes in the pipe, and smoothly runs away downhill to a safe discharge zone. The greatest misconception about French drains is that they are meant to collect surface water, like a gutter. While they can help with that, their true superpower is lowering the underground water table by constantly draining the saturated soil from below. By installing one of these systems around the perimeter of your garden or home, you are effectively creating an invisible shield that stops the rising water long before it ever has a chance to drown your fragile plant roots. But a French drain will only save your yard if it is built with absolute mathematical precision. And that brings us to the importance of the slope. Water is notoriously lazy. It will only flow downhill. If you dig a perfectly flat trench, you are not building a drain at all. You are just building a very expensive underground bathtub that will hold stagnant water forever. To make the water move, your trench must have a continuous downward slope of at least 1%. That means the trench needs to drop 1 inch for every 10 feet of length. Let us paint a clear picture. Imagine rolling a marble down a long, gently sloping hallway. It should never stop or roll backward. That is exactly how the water must behave inside your drainage pipe. The myth that you can just eyeball the slope with a simple level is a recipe for total failure. You need to use proper string lines and laser levels to ensure the trench gets progressively deeper as it moves toward your exit point. Taking the extra time to measure the slope perfectly is the single most important step. If you rush this part, the entire system will fail, and you will be back to square one with a flooded, swampy garden. Let us talk about a hidden hero in this process that you absolutely cannot ignore. That hero is professional-grade geotextile drainage fabric. Many people try to save a few dollars by skipping this step or using cheap weed barrier plastic instead. That is a massive, fatal mistake. If you just dump gravel and a pipe into a bare dirt trench, the surrounding mud will quickly wash into the gravel, clog all the holes in the pipe, and destroy the system in less than 2 years. The geotextile fabric acts as a vital protective burrito for your entire drainage system. You must line the empty trench with this fabric first, then add the gravel and pipe, and finally fold the fabric over the top before covering it with soil. Think of it like a giant coffee filter. It lets the liquid water pass right through with zero resistance, but it completely blocks the tiny particles of mud and silt that want to clog up the works. A common myth is that the holes in the drainage pipe are small enough to keep the dirt out. They absolutely are not. Without that protective fabric wrap, your beautiful new French drain will slowly choke to death on underground mud, and all your hard work will be completely wasted. Choosing the right materials for the inside of your drain is just as critical as the fabric on the outside. You might be tempted to use whatever random rocks or stones you have lying around, but that will not work. You need clean, washed drainage gravel, usually around 1 inch in size. The key word here is washed. If you buy cheap, unwashed gravel that is covered in stone dust, that dust will immediately wash down and turn into a thick, concrete-like sludge at the bottom of your brand new pipe. As for the pipe itself, always choose the rigid, smooth interior PVC pipe over the flexible, corrugated black plastic pipe whenever possible. The myth is that the flexible pipe is better because it is easier to bend around corners. While it is easier to install, those tiny ridges inside the flexible pipe catch sediment and slow down the water flow. Imagine trying to drink a thick milkshake through a straw that is wrinkled and crushed. It is incredibly difficult. A smooth PVC pipe allows the water to rush out quickly and cleanly, ensuring that your system stays totally clear and operates at maximum efficiency to keep that aggressive groundwater far away from your precious garden beds. But what if you live on a completely flat property and there is simply nowhere downhill to send the water? This is where you have to get creative and work alongside nature instead of fighting it. If the water has nowhere to go, you can intentionally create a place for it to gather by digging a beautiful drainage pond at the lowest point of your property. Instead of letting the groundwater spread out evenly across your entire yard and ruin everything, you are giving it a designated, deep bowl to live in. Think of it as a pressure relief valve for your soil. The water will naturally drain out of the surrounding ground and fill up the pond, leaving the rest of your yard remarkably drier and safer for plants. The myth here is that a pond will just make your property wetter and breed millions of mosquitoes. But a properly dug pond that reaches down to the groundwater level will actually act as a magnet for excess moisture in the soil. And if you add a simple aerator or a few native fish, the mosquitoes will be completely eliminated. It is a fantastic way to take a frustrating landscaping problem and turn it into a stunning, highly functional water feature for your backyard. Turning that functional hole in the ground into an attractive landscaping feature requires a specific strategy. You do not want it to look like an abandoned mud pit. The secret is to surround your new drainage pond with heavily thirsty, water-loving plants that will thrive in the constantly wet soil right at the water's edge. Plants like Japanese irises, marsh marigolds, and beautiful ornamental rushes will absolutely love having their feet wet all year long. This creates a natural transition zone that stabilizes the banks and prevents muddy erosion. A brilliant example of this is creating a natural stone border using large boulders that slowly descend into the water, giving it the appearance of a natural alpine lake. The misconception is that landscaping around water is incredibly difficult or expensive. In reality, nature wants to grow plants near water. By choosing the right native, moisture-loving species, the area around your pond will practically maintain itself. Not only are you lowering the water table for the rest of your dry garden, but you are also creating a vibrant microclimate that will attract gorgeous butterflies, singing frogs, and beneficial birds to your property. Now, let us focus on what to do if you want to grow a traditional vegetable garden, but your groundwater is just too aggressive. The absolute best workaround is to build high-quality raised garden beds. If you cannot lower the water below the plants, you must lift the plants far above the water. Raised beds give you total, uncompromising control over the soil quality and the drainage. By building boxes that are 12 to 24 inches tall, you are creating a safe, dry haven for your vegetable roots. The most common myth about raised beds is that they are just a cosmetic trend for fancy gardens. In a yard with a high water table, they are actually a vital life support system. Imagine building a strong wooden fortress on stilts to protect your family from a flood. That is exactly what a raised bed does for your delicate tomato plants and root vegetables. The groundwater can rise and soak the native soil all at once, but the roots of your vegetables will remain perfectly safe, warm, and highly oxygenated in the fluffy, imported soil mix above. This method completely bypasses the groundwater problem, guaranteeing a massive harvest, even if your lawn looks like a shallow swamp. When constructing these raised beds to combat high groundwater, the physical design is absolutely critical. You cannot just slap some thin boards together and fill them with cheap dirt. First, do not put a solid bottom on the bed. You want the excess rainwater from above to drain freely out the bottom, while the height of the bed keeps the groundwater from reaching up. A great technique is to fill the very bottom of the raised box with a thick layer of coarse branches and old logs before adding the soil. This is a variation of a method called hugel culture. The logs act as a massive natural sponge. During a dry spell, they hold on to moisture, but during a flood, The large air gaps between the logs provide exceptional drainage and stop the groundwater from wicking straight up into the good soil. The myth is that you must use expensive treated lumber to build the beds. In fact, using thick, untreated cedar or even large natural stones is much safer for growing organic vegetables and will last for many years. Building these beds correctly ensures that you create a perfect, well-drained growing environment that is entirely immune to whatever the unpredictable water table is doing beneath it.
Let us switch gears and talk about the immense power of trees. A huge misconception is that all trees will simply rot and die in a yard with a high water table. While it is true that many popular fruit trees despise wet feet, there is an entire army of majestic trees that absolutely thrive in swampy conditions. If you have an area that is constantly soggy, stop fighting it and plant species that naturally evolved to live right in the water. Weeping willows, river birches, and gorgeous red maples will drink up the excess moisture like giant biological straws. Picture a massive, ancient willow tree leaning gracefully over a wetland. Its root system is uniquely designed to pull oxygen from the water itself. By planting these specific, water-loving trees in your most problematic areas, you are essentially installing nature's own water pumps. They will rapidly absorb hundreds of gallons of water from the soil every single day during the summer, naturally lowering the water table in that localized area. Instead of wasting money trying to drain a swampy corner of your yard, you can transform it into a stunning, shady grove of resilient trees that actively work to dry out your property. The way these specific trees function as natural water pumps is truly fascinating and highly effective for managing your landscape. Through a biological process called transpiration, a single mature willow tree can pull upwards of 100 gallons of water out of the ground in a single sunny day, releasing it harmlessly into the atmosphere as invisible water vapor. It is literally an organic engine running on solar power, dedicated entirely to drying out your soil. The myth is that planting trees will just create more shade and make the ground even wetter. The reality is that the intense pumping action of the roots far outweighs the moisture retained by the shade. Imagine having a heavy-duty electric water pump running continuously in your yard for free, without ever needing to plug it in or pay an electricity bill. That is the immense value these trees provide. By strategically placing a line of river birches or bald cypresses along the lowest, wettest edge of your property, you create a living, breathing barrier that actively intercepts the groundwater, keeping the rest of your yard significantly drier and more manageable for all of your more sensitive plants. But what if you are absolutely determined to grow sensitive fruit trees, like apples or cherries, on a property plagued by high groundwater? You cannot plant them normally, or they will definitely die from root rot. The secret technique used by professional orchard growers in wet climates is called planting on a mound or a berm. Instead of digging a deep hole down into the dangerous waterlogged zone, you place the root ball directly on top of the native ground level and build a wide, gentle hill of high-quality topsoil over it. This completely elevates the vital root flare above the danger zone. Picture a majestic castle built high up on an earthwork mound to protect it from the invading floodwaters. That is exactly the environment you are creating for your apple tree. A common myth is that trees planted on mounds will easily blow over in a strong wind. However, if you make the mound wide enough, the roots will spread out horizontally and anchor the tree with incredible strength. This brilliant, simple technique allows you to enjoy a bountiful harvest of fresh fruit on land that would otherwise be considered entirely useless for growing traditional orchard trees. Let us explore how to improve the texture of the soil itself to help combat the devastating effects of a high water table. Even if the water is very close to the surface, the way your topsoil behaves makes a massive difference.
Heavy, compacted clay soil acts like a solid brick. It holds on to every drop of water and suffocates fragile roots instantly. To give your plants a fighting chance, you must aggressively amend the top layer of soil by mixing in massive amounts of coarse builder's sand and rich organic compost. This creates precious macropores, which are tiny, vital tunnels that allow water to drain down quickly and let life-saving air flow back in. A dangerous myth is that simply adding sand to clay will fix the drainage. In reality, mixing just sand and clay without compost creates a rigid mixture almost identical to concrete. You must add the spongy organic compost to keep the soil fluffy and alive. Imagine baking a heavy, dense loaf of bread versus baking a light, airy cake. You want your soil to feel like the cake. By continuously adding organic matter every single season, you build a thick, airy top layer that provides a safe cushion for roots. For extreme situations where passive drainage simply is not enough, you need to introduce active mechanical solutions. When your yard essentially turns into a lake after heavy rain because the groundwater has nowhere to go, installing a catch basin paired with an outdoor sump pump becomes a true lifesaver. A catch basin is a large, buried plastic box with a grate on top, placed in the absolute lowest spot of your flooded yard. Inside this box sits a heavy-duty submersible pump. As the groundwater naturally fills the basin, the pump automatically kicks on and forcefully pushes the water through a buried pipe to a safe location far away, like a municipal storm drain. The myth here is that outdoor pumps are too dangerous or complicated to maintain. With modern, fully sealed, waterproof pumps, they are incredibly safe and surprisingly reliable. Imagine having a dedicated, invisible robot guard constantly watching over your yard, springing into action the second the water level gets too high. While it requires a power source and some upfront investment, an active sump pump system offers absolute peace of mind and guarantees that your garden will never be submerged for long. Another beautiful, ecologically friendly way to manage excess water on a difficult property is to design a dedicated rain garden. A rain garden is not just a hole in the muddy ground. It is a shallow, carefully engineered depression planted with deep-rooted native plants and specialized soil mixtures designed to absorb massive amounts of water incredibly fast. You intentionally direct the surface water runoff and the shallow groundwater toward this specific garden area. The deep roots of the native plants act like hundreds of tiny drills, piercing through the heavy soil and creating pathways for the water to percolate downward rapidly. The myth is that a rain garden is just a swamp filled with breeding mosquitoes. In truth, a properly designed rain garden is engineered to drain completely dry within 24 to 48 hours after a storm, making it totally impossible for mosquitoes to survive. Picture a beautiful, blooming sponge that instantly soaks up the floodwaters and then slowly releases the moisture deep into the earth. It is an incredibly smart way to protect the rest of your landscape while creating a stunning focal point. Finally, we absolutely must discuss the long-term reality of living with a high water table. You have to understand that groundwater management is never a simple install-and-forget situation. It requires ongoing vigilance and regular maintenance. Even the most perfectly constructed French drains eventually need their clean-out pipes flushed with a high-pressure hose to remove fine silt. Your beautiful raised beds will slowly settle over time and require a fresh top-off of fluffy organic compost every single spring. The water-loving trees you planted will need careful pruning to ensure they remain healthy and continue pumping efficiently. The biggest misconception is that once you install a drainage pipe, your water problems are solved forever. Think of your yard's drainage system just like you think of your car's engine. It works incredibly well, but only if you perform routine maintenance and keep an eye out for potential issues. By consistently monitoring your soil moisture, checking your pipe exits for clogs, and continually adding organic matter to your garden beds, you can easily stay one step ahead of the rising water. Your garden will not just survive, it will thrive beautifully for decades.
So, here is the incredible plot twist we have uncovered today. High groundwater is not an absolute death sentence for your property. It is simply an engineering puzzle waiting to be brilliantly solved. Whether you choose to install a powerful French drain, elevate your delicate vegetables in protective raised beds, or plant a stunning grove of thirsty willow trees, you now have the exact blueprint to take total control of your landscape. The most important takeaway is that you must stop fighting the water and start intelligently directing it. By elevating your roots and strategically moving the excess moisture, you are finally unlocking the true potential of your property. Thank you so much for watching and learning with us today. If this video helped you finally understand your soggy yard, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and leave a comment below. I want to ask you a question to get the discussion going right now. What is the most frustrating water issue you have ever faced in your own garden? And which of these methods are you going to try first? Let us chat in the comments.